Love is something that remains a mystery to humans. It can come in different ways, either expected or unexpected, suddenly or after a long time, through hatred, and even irrespective of age. Another dynamic thing about love is that it makes you want to hold on and never let go, but at the same time makes you want to leave. This is the story of Josie, who experiences love after meeting a young man unexpectedly. A woman's and a man's voices are heard in the background as the scene takes us slowly to a house. She tells him that she was born in Budapest and that she's traveled to a lot of places, but now as she sits down looking it over, it all seems remote. Lee Young-sok sees a crippled woman on the floor and rushes to her aid. He quickly brings a chair, carries her from the floor, and sets her on it. Picking up the electric wheelchair, he helps her back into it at her request, and she thanks him. When tries to help her push, she tells him to leave, but she discovers that the electric wheelchair no longer works. He quickly goes to the nearest shop and borrows a cart, which he uses to push her to her home. Right outside her home, they meet her grandma, who asks what happened. The young woman explains that a man tried to touch her, but her chair fell, and the old woman gets angry with her for going out even though she seems to be hurt. Her grandma tells him to help her, and Young-sok takes her into the yard, and he and her grandma help her to switch from the electric wheelchair to the manual one. As he is about to leave, she invites him to eat as a thank you, saying it is the least she can do. Young-sok is seated uncomfortably as she prepares a meal for him. Finished with the cooking, she asks him to eat up, and he thanks her even though he's uncomfortable. The girl scoffs, annoyed that he's eating the food like it is poisoned, and drags herself to her room. He forces himself and gets comfortable after a while and leaves after eating. In the background, Young-sok tells us that was their first meeting. In the next scene, Young-sok is sleeping on a couch and a woman wakes him up. She tells him to get up, that they are in trouble, and that her boyfriend is coming, but she tells him to buy some milk for her to delay him a bit. Young-sok gets up from the couch, wears his clothes, and rushes out of the house. On his way out, a man stops him, telling him to wait. He sees that it is the woman's boyfriend. The man tells him about his unzipped bag and he thanks him, finally going his way. Young-seok goes to school and attends his class. After the class, he leaves with his friend, Soo Kyung, who asks if he is done with classes for the semester. He answers that he is and asks if she is done, but she says she has one more. She grumbles, saying that she wants to play hockey, and he says she needs to graduate. They come across a female professor, and it turns out to be the woman whom Young-sok had been at her house earlier. At a cafe, Young-sok is facing the window having a drink when he sees the disabled girl's grandma packing usable things from the trash. He helps her carry some, and when they reach the house, the old woman tells the girl to cook for him. The girl is a little surprised to see him. This time, he takes a look around as he's now comfortable. He sees a picture of a man holding a small girl and asks who he is. She tells him that it's her father and she is the little girl he is holding. She says that she was born in Budapest. Young-sok says that she does not look like him, but she says she takes after her mother so she doesn't look mixed. They all eat at the table and she watches as he eats almost too well this time. He is more comfortable now. As Young-sok is working at the cafe, Soo Kyung watches him from her seat. Their eyes meet at a point and Young-sok smiles, making Soo Kyung shy. After work, both of them are at a bar where Young-seok tells Soo Kyung about the crippled girl and her grandma. He complains that every time he's there she calls him a kid, and he promises to call her girl the next time he sees her because she does not look old. He talks about how he helped the old woman, and Soo Kyung asks if their life is hard since they are surviving by collecting recyclables, but he says it is not, because they have a house with a yard and some people do not even have a place to sleep. Soo Kyung talks about the time she volunteered for a job and worked with her aunt. She says they are great as it is a welfare center that renovates disabled people's houses for free. They go back to Soo Kyung's house. There, they are lying on her bed and making out. When Young-sok tries to sleep with her, she complains about the paper-thin walls making him stop. Young-sok asks where she is from, and she says she is from Sucheon. He starts talking about how he has never been in a cramped house like this and tells her to get a new place since it's cheaper than the expensive houses in Seoul, but she tells him she will have to quit school if she pays higher rent. After a while, he leaves her house. Meanwhile, at her house, the crippled girl is afraid when she sees shadows, so she turns to open her door and faces her grandmother's room, but her grandma starts defecating in a bowl, and she's grossed out. She is annoyed and says even she uses the toilet. Disgusted, she turns to face the other side again. The next day, at work, Young-sok receives food, spam, and dried laver seaweed as a gift from his boss. He gives it to the disabled girl instead, saying that he hardly ever cooks and it will waste. She sarcastically thanks him for giving him his trash. When he's about to leave, she tells him to eat first, and he says she does not need to bother, but he enters anyway. He watches as she is cooking and asks her if she needs help. She gives him a task to do and he starts doing it. As they are working, he asks if she has a cell phone, but she says she does not and she just uses the house line. He also asks when the television last worked, and she says it worked when she was a child. Realizing he does not know her name, Young-sok asks for her name and she tells him to call her Josie. It is another day and Young-sok is at Josie's house trying to fix her broken wheelchair. She mocks him when he cannot fix the electric wheelchair. Trying to prove himself, Young-sok starts rambling about how he has studied motors. In the end, he decides that he cannot fix it and Josie tells him not to expect food since he cannot do it. She tells him to bring a lone whiskey bottle for her, and when he does, she takes a deep breath. The bottle at her nose, she says a whiskey like this has scarcity and value. She complains that they drank it dry, and Young Sok says she can't blame them. He collects the bottle from her, inhaling it deeply too. Josie smiles as she watches him. She collects the bottle, inhales again, and starts calling out the ingredients. Josie starts pushing her wheelchair, and Young Sok follows behind her. They enter a room that is full of books and empty wine bottles. Looking around, he asks if it was her grandma that picked up the books, and she says yes. She says that people throw away trash, but what they think is trash is useful for her, just like the food he gave her earlier in the day. Young Sok finds a sticker on one of the books. Removing it, he sticks it to the wall and writes his number. He tells her to call if she ever needs him. She asks him for a favor, telling him to buy a book for her. She also tells him that that is the book she went out to buy the day she met him. In the background, Young Sok tells us that Josie liked the main character of the book, and that's why she called herself Josie. Days pass as Young Seok keeps going to Josie's house. In school the next day, Young Sok runs into a building to hide from the female professor, Min Hai. While in the building, he gets a call from Josie. He is shocked when he gets her call, but still goes. Young Sok takes her to the front of the Hyundai Auto Service Center. They stop just outside the building, and she sends him to the service center to call a boy for her. At the shop, Young Sok finds an angry man with a different name than she told him, Kwak Chol-ho. Seeing him, Young Sok feels a little intimidated, but the man still comes out to meet Josie. Outside the auto center, Young Sok stands at the side as he listens to the both of them talk. Kwak Chol-ho asks Josie if her grandma is dead, as someone else came to get him this time, but she says that her grandma is alive. She asks how his skin problem is, but he asks why she's asking. She tells Chol-ho not to eat too much meat since he needs to boost his immunity. She tells him to take some propolis, and he asks if she read the books her grandma picked. He laughs, calling her a dumb cripple when she says yes, but she tells him not to talk to his mom like that. He refuses, saying she's not his mom, but she just tells him to stop by for a meal. Getting to the main reason, she asks him to repair her electric wheelchair, and he asks how he can repair an electric wheelchair when he fixes cars. On their way back to Josie's house, as Young Seok is pushing her, he asks her how Chol-ho became her son, but she says it is not important. Not long after, she tells Young Sok that Kwak Chol-ho is an orphan who her father brought home one day. She says his mom threw him away when he was a baby at the police station, so she decided to become his mom. Young Sok asks her if it's the same dad in the picture, but she says it's not. He asks her if she was an orphan because her grandma told him that she was, and she tells him that she wasn't and that he should not listen to her grandma. After a short silence, Young Sok says that the trees are nice, but she says the leaves are dying. Silently and prettily dying. At school, Young Sok is in his professor's office. At first, the professor rambles about how he likes drinking coffee with people, but after settling down, the professor asks how his job hunting is going, and Young Sok tells him that he's looking into various places. Professor Choi tells him to consider becoming an intern at Weaver, a branch marketing company. He explains he will have to do a simple interview first. He also says that the director is not prejudiced against rural colleges. Even though he's surprised at first, Young Sok accepts it gratefully. At the school garden, Soo Kyung brings coffee for a busy Young Seok. She asks what he is doing, and he replies saying that he is doing a thesis for Professor Choi. Soo Kyung complains that he gives too much work to Young Seok and that it was like that during their summer break, but Young Sok dismisses it, saying he's a decent man who looks after him. In the evening, it is raining and Young Sok is at Josie's house watching Chol-ho work on the wheelchair. Chol-ho complains, saying it's not a car, so what would he know? He tells Young Sok to go, but changing his mind, asks him if he has eaten. At the restaurant, he tells Young Sok more about Josie, saying that she is always having weird fantasies, lying to herself, and believing in them. He also mentions that they grew up in the same orphanage. He says that she was abandoned even before him. Chol-ho says that he always hated the word mom, and she suddenly started calling herself his mom. He laughs, remembering the moment. He tells Young Sok that when she was 10, she put cockroach poison in the food of the head of the orphanage, and as he was in the hospital, she ran away. No one knew where she was, and the grandmother quietly took Josie in. He says she sent him a letter that she was okay, and they met 15 years later. The next day, as Young Seok helps the grandmother carry some cartons from the trash again, he asks her to consider applying to a welfare center for the disabled where Soo Hyun's aunt works, but she refuses to consider, saying that nothing is free. He explains that his friend's aunt works there. He also explains that it's subsidized by the city and that they're going to fix the kitchen and bathroom. He tells her that their fund is in excess this year and that if she agrees, they'll come at once. He explains that there isn't a lot of paperwork involved and that she just needs to write her name. In the next scene, a water purifier donated by a sponsor is being installed by the welfare center. Young Sok thanks Soo Kyung's aunt for her help, and she says they would have done more, but since they are funded by the government, their resources are limited. In her room, Josie is resting, reading a book. Young Sok comes in and sits down beside her. He asks her where she would travel to if she ever did, and she says she will not since she has already gone everywhere. Young Sok asks which place was best, and she replies saying Scotland. He browses the place and shows her as she's looking at it. He touches her face slightly and they have an awkward moment. Young Sok rushes out of the room when Soo Kyung's aunt comes in, leaving the door slightly open. The aunt updates him on the renovations in the house and he sees Soo Kyung beside her. He goes outside to talk to her. She says the house is charming and she mentions that the disabled woman is younger than she thought. By the time he comes back inside, the door is closed and he is even locked out. Josie tells him not to come back to her house anymore because he makes her uncomfortable. Sighing, he tells her to rest and she pleads a little desperately that he shouldn't come back. As he leaves, Josie is in her room staring sadly at the window as usual. On the subway home, Young Sok looks sad as he stares into the air. In the next scene, Young Sok is with Soo Kyung and they are at a restaurant. He is wearing a fancy suit and she tells him it fits him. She asks if his interview went well and if he got the job, and he says he will see if he will survive the interview. She asks if he will move to Seoul and he tells her that he will eventually move to Seoul. She states that their relationship will not work and Young Sok smiles a little though his eyes are not. Next, he goes to the bar with Professor Choi. They share a limited edition whiskey and the professor tells him that he will have to find another job for him. He says that the female Professor Min Hai spoke against him to the director, and there is nothing he can do. On the road, Young Sok is seated at a terminal. He comes across Soo Kyung's aunt and her daughter and she tells him that Josie's grandmother passed away the previous month due to ill health. Young Sok finally goes to Josie's house. The atmosphere is a bit sad as he tries to find out how she has been. She asks if he has gotten a job after his graduation, but he keeps quiet. Worried about her, Young Sok asks to fix the window that the breeze is coming through since it is winter, and also the handle on the gate, trying to make her more comfortable. Upset, Josie tells him she is comfortable and that she feels insulted. She tells him not to take pity on her and that he should leave because she feels uncomfortable. But he says he'll come back, but she tells him not to. As he leaves, Josie comes out with a flimsy sweater crying. He walks up to her, and on reaching her, she begs him not to go and to stay by her side, and he says he will. He holds her face and kisses her. Back in Josie's room, they are on her makeshift bed and she tells him not to go and that he should stay with her, if not she'll spread rumors to the volunteers, and even in his school that he forced himself on her. She also says that she likes him. In the next scene, Young Sok moves into the house. The house is livelier as the TV creates background noise. Young Sok is preparing dinner while Josie goes through his things facing the window. She sees something moving through the hole in the fence. When Young Sok asks her, she says she saw a tiger. He is shocked at first but dismisses it, saying it's impossible. In the yard of their house the next day, Josie tells him that if the tiger had come in the previous night, she would not have been scared because he was with her. He lets her know that he might not be able to fend off a tiger, but that he'll allow the tiger to eat him while she runs. Later, Young Sok fixes the hole in the fence as Josie watches him doing so through the window. In the next scene, Young Sok is at an interview when he comes across Min Hai. She drives him home and during the drive, she tells him that he'll make the first round and that she recommended him. She also explains that she did not recommend him for the previous job because she knew he would not survive there. It's morning and Young Sok is seated before the television watching the news. Josie comes out of the bathroom showing him the pregnancy test, which reads positive. Next, Young Sok and Josie are lying down on their makeshift bed and looking through Google search at the place they first met. It is too cold and Young Sok discovers that the oil in the heater has run dry, so he runs out to get some. Still looking at the street they met on the phone, Josie starts crying when she sees an old woman pushing a cart containing cartons inside, remembering her grandma. Young Sok returns with a kerosene heater in hand. He drops it and joins Josie in their makeshift bed. In the next scene, Young Sok and Josie are outside at an amusement park. They stand in front of the Ferris wheel staring at it and Young Sok asks if she has ever been up so high. Josie replies saying of course she has. She explains that she was on a hot air balloon over Kenya safari. She smiles as she talks vividly about the scenery below her that day. She tells him she could feel Africa. Young Sok carries Josie on his back into the Ferris wheel and sets her down. Josie holds his hands tightly as they ride the Ferris wheel so much so that he asks if she's scared, but she says she is not. The ride quickly comes to an end, but the man meant to open the door fails to do so, quickly making them go for an inevitable second round. The next scene shows it has been 5 years and Young Sok and Josie are seen walking through the streets of Scotland. They go to a hill and Young Sok carries her across to the edge and drops her on a bench. They sit together happy that they finally reached here. Josie says she wanted to come with him and Young Sok is no longer beside her. Her voice continues in the background as she expresses how she always wants to go to the most distant lands with him, but at the same time wants to stay cooped up in her house together. The scene changes back to Korea where Josie is seated facing the window with her phone in hand and looking at a street in Scotland through Google. She looks healthier and happier and her face now has color. The house remains the same but looks more homely and welcoming. Cholho urges her, telling her to hurry up, and she tells him not to talk to his mum like that. Cholho takes her grandmother's ashes as they leave the house. Outside, they meet Soo Kyung's aunt. They all enter the car and head to a cemetery where they place her grandma's ashes. Looking at it, she smiles. In the next scene, Young Sok leaves work. He enters Soo Kyung's car. Entering the car, she says it is a nice thing that they close at the same time, and he says he had to rush. On their way home, Soo Kyung shows him their wedding invitation, and he says people think it's weird they are getting married during the winter. She asks if he doesn't want it, but he says he does. She explains that it is not as expensive and much easier to have a wedding in the winter. During the drive, Young Sok sees someone in a wheelchair through the window but is disappointed when it does not turn out to be Josie. As they wait for the traffic light to turn green, Josie's car comes up beside them, and Young Sok sees her when he turns his head, but she does not see him. Young Sok and Josie meet at an aquarium. They look around a bit and finally stop in front of a group of fish. Speaking up first, Josie tells Young Sok that she is fine now and that he does not need to worry. She speaks metaphorically, telling him that to human beings the fishes might be trapped, but to the fishes, the human beings are the ones that are trapped. She says she thinks some of the fish are happy. She assures him again that she's no longer lonely and that she's okay now. She tells him that even if he is not there, she will think that he is next to her, so he shouldn't worry. Young Sok is reluctant to accept what she's saying, but in the end, he cries his eyes out. He tries to leave, but she holds onto his hand. As they walk through the streets on their way to their different homes, she makes the same statement she once said. The flowers are dying, silently and prettily dying. Kindly subscribe and like for more videos. Thank you for watching.